Ever since Max Schreck transformed into Count Orlok in the now infamous silent film Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau in 1922, the subject of Bram Stoker's Dracula has graced the screens across the ages. Like the titular character from one of Gothic literature's most finest creations, Dracula seems to be eternal, forever gracing the celluloid art form whilst adapting and transitioning across the years. With the latest feature film Renfield hitting the cinemas last month, starring Nick Cage and Nicholas Hoult, along with the upcoming Voyage of the Demeter, it seems like Dracula is once again flavour of the month. So I thought I'd take a quick snapshot of this enigmatic character and what draws us to him year on year. Notably, it would be Universal who would elevate Stoker's creation into the limelight with Todd Browning's Dracula in 1931, starring Bela Lugosi, whose interpretation would be the catapult for the look and feel that this character would bring to the screen, and would initiate a further 4 sequels before Abbott and Costello turned his image into a comical adaptation. It would take a further 10 years before a production company would bring Count Dracula back into out of the darkness with the Hammer Films 1958 version starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Hammer would use their newfound success and blood red recipe to push the Dracula series into a total of 9 films, with the aforementioned Lee appearing in 7 of those movies. Interestingly, Dracula wouldn't appear in their first sequel, Brides of Dracula, directed by Terence Fisher. During this time, numerous other production companies would try their hand at this subject matter, including Blood of Dracula, an attempt from producer Herman Cohen to repeat the success of I Was a Teenage Werewolf. The latter would appear in the It miniseries made in 1990, as it was the height of pop culture stateside during the 50s and would see the Losers Club watch it at their cinema. As the Hammer recipe grew stale, Roman Polanski would inject some much needed zest with The Fearless Vampire Killers in 1967, a blatant parody of the British film company's vision. Following this, Jesus Franco would add some Spanish flavour with Count Dracula in 1970, starring Christopher Lee again in the titular role, before blaxploitation movement would see an African prince lured into the land of the dead in Blackula and scream Blackula Scream, before Andy Warhol would dabble as well, introducing his own visual style with Blood for Dracula in 1974. 5 years later, Universal would try to reinvent the fable and bring some much needed sex appeal and cast in Frank Langella as Dracula. This also coincided with another version of Nosferatu coming to the screen, directed by the enigmatic Klaus Kinski, Nosferatu Phantom der Nacht, and which also brought its own cult appeal as a result. A brief interlude in the comedy realm would see Duncan Regar take on Dracula in the Monster Squad, which comes across as a haunted version of the Goonies. And then he would pretty much stay dormant until he would be moulded once more for Francis Ford Coppola in Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring Gary Oldman, Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves, and Anthony Hopkins in the early 90s. Mel Brooks would try to craft his comedic touch with Dracula Dead and Lovin' It by 1955, which starred Leslie Nielsen, before the shouldn't be comical but tragically is Dracula 2000, presented by Wes Craven and starring Gerard Butler. Its only saving grace during this time frame is the simply brilliant Shadow of the Vampire, a quirky portrayal of the making of Nosferatu that would depict actor Max Schreck as a real-life vampire, awesomely portrayed by Willem Dafoe. By the mid-2000s, Count Dracula would find himself morphed into the Stephen Sommers universe with Van Helsing starring Hugh Jackman, a movie which in my mind is probably best forgotten. Another film director auteur would try his hand at the subject in 2013 when Dario Argento would provide us with Dracula 3D, but this would be pale in comparison by his earlier work. The last time we saw Dracula grace our screens would be in the underwhelming Dracula Untold starring Luke Evans, which left us wondering if there was still life in this age-old tale. This may well disappear with the latest news of these two features that have come out with Renfield and also with Voyage of the Demeter on the horizon. And Stephen King would also seek inspiration from the Count in his own tale Salem's Lot, which is still going through some production development as we speak. All these things are gathering together for what will hopefully be some exciting times for Dracula on the screen. I, for one, can't wait to see how they revamp Dracula for a modern audience that will horrify and delight the masses. Bring it on.